this is not about mobile learning. In a sense, it's about neither the mobile part of it, the technology, nor about the educational or the learning part of it. Maybe it's actually about a much broader and social context of that. Nevertheless, I will persist. I will talk about the impact of mobiles on our society and about the impact of that connectivity, mobility, functionality on their lives and on our societies. That isn't to say that that impact isn't different for different generations, different social classes, different cultures, different countries. If you like, the world isn't the way it was, and mobile technology is very, very influential in the transition from the way it used to be to the way it's becoming. So my talk, if you like, is about social change, personal change, rather than about learning and rather than about the technology. And I also ought to say that it is based on research, on my research, other people's research. So although some of it might be quite generalised, if you pressed me, there would be evidence that I can point to for any of the stuff I'm saying. I'm somewhere in the middle, not apocalyptic and not business as usual, but maybe I'm stating a case rather than stating a truth. And it's for you to, pick your way through it and see what your judgments or decisions are about the things I'm going to describe. And those things I'm going to describe could basically be characterized along, if you like, three dimensions, three characteristics. One is change. Things are changing. Of a social change moving us from what people have called modernity, the way we've thought about things for the last 200 years, to something that comes after that. One of those depictions is called liquid modernity, kind of meaning nothing stays still or solidifies enough for us to get our heads around it. Whereas 20, 30, 40 years ago, things used to be stable and solid and you could get your head around them before they changed and then changed again. Another might be, and I deliberately use the word connectedness, not connectivity. People being in touch, ideas moving around rather than thinking about bits and bytes and modems and networks and all of that stuff. And, well, obviously motion and movement. So I'm kind of saying that what I'm describing in the most general terms would be characterized by those three things. I'm not promoting or advocating this, I'm attempting to describe it, very conscious of the fact that there are downsides. And I see, for example, people periodically saying they're taking time off Facebook, a bit like taking time off alcohol. They obviously don't regard it as an unconditionally good thing to be on social media. That's one example, and we also hear about the amount of child labour in Central Africa, digging cobalt out of the ground that is an essential part of mobile phones. So none of this is free, and it hasn't got unconditionally better. What is the nature, or what are the constituents of this change that I'm attempting to describe? Well, an obvious and tangible one would be the impact on the economy. The fact that increasingly more of the, artifacts, assets, commodities, transactions, resources are now digital and are now mediated by mobile technology. More and more of different countries' economies are devoted to these kinds of assets or commodities. I mean, people talk about Apple apparently has the same size economy as Poland. Nevertheless, that's an indication of the size of the money going through these kind of digital, global, largely American corporations, built on the back of this technology and our appetite for it. But also at a national level. So if you look at it was called the 4G sell-off. It was the auction, for example, in the UK, of the bandwidth for 4G phone network. Suddenly discovering that you as a nation have something of that value that you can auction is a bit like discovering North Sea oil. It becomes strategically important and nationally important. a very easy and obvious example of what's called performance support to enhance people's productivity. Yeah, and I would have argued that this was a performance support fantasy, the idea of putting something minute in your ear and it translates every human language for you. Well, it now turns out an American company is selling something that basically does this for less than $200. What does this technology do for language learning? Is there any longer any point in learning a language? I mean, I'd argue that there is, but the simplistic answer might be there's not, because you've got a piece of technology to do it for you anyway. You know, why bother to learn a language if this will just talk to you in your own language anyway? You know, the more that technology does for us, what exactly is the purpose of education? And again, I'd qualify what I'm saying by saying that any of what I'm describing happens differentially. You know, it happens differently across different age groups and generations. It happens across different social classes. It happens differently in different countries. It depended on hierarchy, gender, formality. So maybe you could answer your phone in a cafe, but you couldn't answer your phone in a restaurant. You could answer your phone if you were the boss, but not if you weren't. And again, so you can see the evolution of different social practices as our various societies have learnt to live in a variety of different ways. I suppose I've tried to summarise it as a dilution of the here and now. And for example, people have said that now time is socially negotiated. You don't have to make appointments and keep them on a fixed basis. You can ring someone up and tell them you'll be late. And on a broader scale, I guess we see the same with time zones and seasons, because we are connected to, our colleagues in, Florida, San Francisco, Australia, and to some extent internalising our sense of where are they in their day. You know, so I used to have a publisher in Australia and be very conscious, and I now have a project in Brazil and other colleagues in universities in Palestine, and I'm thinking, okay, so it's 2 o'clock here, so it's 4 o'clock there, and they're just about to leave work, I better get a move on. It kind of restructures one sense of the working day. And I suppose also the same is true because we're connected from north and south hemispheres. I now know not to say stupid things like, it's autumn, the nights are closing in, because actually for half the world they're doing the very opposite. Sociologist by the name of Kenneth Gergen talks about absent presence as well, where he talks about the family, although in the family living room, although he could be talking about students in the lecture theatre, being absently present. They are all there physically, but they're connected via all sorts of devices, you know, iPads, tablets, mobile phones, instant messaging, to people somewhere else. They're all actually absent. I suppose what Gergen doesn't point out is, of course, by the same token, people are brought into that space, not physically, they're not kind of teleported. But nevertheless, you know, what we used to see as a physical gathering now becomes very different because of the connectivity of the devices. So what else has happened? Well, I suppose I'd argue that, the literature would also say that there's lots of accounts about the way these technologies are not like laptop computers or desktop computers. They become somehow integrated into your idea of yourself, and you wouldn't want to be parted with it any more than you'd want to be parted with your ankle. So this is an article from The Guardian of 2 young girls saying they'd rather lose their kidneys than lose their mobile phones. A representative from Nokia said that within Nokia, because mobile phones were personal, private, we all had one, they were referred to as our new private parts. Ever since mobile phone services were introduced in KwaZulu-Natal, some parents have named their children after some of the terms used by mobile service providers. According to the Home Affairs statistics, some of the children born from 1993 have the following names. Hands-free Shalabalaba, Contract Mabuso, Pay-as-you-go Mafika, Call Me Later Nduluva, Motorota Buthelezi. And I recognise that the meaning or the significance of languages, of names, is different in different societies. And this may have not the kind of significance it would to, I don't know, me as a Western European, but nevertheless, these parents didn't decide to give their kids names like General Motors or West Ham United. They chose all of these things like Nokia Kumbulo. What we've also seen, thanks to this technology, is the rise of what people 10 years ago were calling citizen journalism. The fact that the functionality allows us to take pictures of events, and this was taken outside Aldgate Station on the day of the bombings in 2008, and to distribute that story and that image. Well, it changes the ball game of news, even if it doesn't improve it. But I guess in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen the rise of quote-unquote fake news. Britain threatens to invade Switzerland over Toblerone-shaped row. Yoko Ono had an affair with Hillary Clinton in the 1970s, etc. And this is versions of this are fairly prolific. This is Abraham Lincoln apparently saying, don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it. Apparently Abraham Lincoln said that. And we also saw increasing concerns about the rise of surveillance. And I don't know if you can read this, but the kid is saying, my dad says you're monitoring our calls, and Obama, God, those were the days, Obama, saying he's not your dad. So you could argue, this is kind of resonating with, I don't know, Foucault's depiction of the panopticon. The British people are having CCTV images taken of them 400 times a day, and this is just another part of it. That's the connection, that people are losing out because of this, and none of this, education or technology, are neutral. They're all serving someone's interest. We just have to recognise who they might be. Cause and effect are also easy to distinguish and separate. That reality is real, and language and mathematics and physics are the way we understand and depict them. And so my last slide, this is talking about the kind of disintegration of our simple understandings of the world that I'd kind of argue have been catalysed by the mobile phone, and it portrays the end of the good cop, bad cop routine, because it no longer gets any results. Instead, you get someone confessing because they can't take any more of this indeterministic postmodern rationalism. I never ever felt so completely lost. And on that note,